just wondering, like for me, considering all of the ways that China spies on the U.S. and, wages unrestricted warfare, is the information that they could get from a spy balloon really that valuable?
Okay, so here's the deal. Satellites can only get so much because they're so far away. The unique things about this balloon is its altitude and what it could collect. So I presume that it could collect similar to what, let's say, a high flying U-2 could collect, which is signals intelligence and imagery intelligence. Now, one of the things that the PLA is doing is they're developing hypersonic missiles. You've had some programs about that. And what they need to know is how to launch the hypersonic missile to avoid radar, the radars that the U.S. has and Canada has as part of NORAD. So this balloon can collect information about those radars at a low altitude, or the altitude that a hypersonic missile or even their own bombers can fly to avoid detection. And furthermore, they could develop stealth technology that would basically be calibrated to what these radars are designed to collect. Now, one of the things that was interesting was the fact that the size of these reconnaissance balloons or the payloads associated with them have been getting smaller. And so what they're doing, some people say, is they're checking the calibration of these radars, for example. Another example is they flew over some seriously important military bases, such as Offutt Air Force Base, which is the headquarters of U.S. Strategic Command, which controls all of the U.S. nuclear weapon systems. Now, to get that close and to collect some of the signals that are coming out of there is very significant. Who knows what they collected in terms of perhaps phone calls or some vulnerabilities that are associated with that location. I used to serve at Offutt Air Force Base, and I would be very, very surprised to see an adversary's balloon with intelligence collection package above the base. The other thing about that balloon was it was steerable. In other words, it seems to have its own ability to maneuver and hover over sites. So what it was doing in some places, it was hovering over, let's say, Offutt Air Force Base or another base, Maelstrom, where there are missile silos or other bases where we have bombers, and collecting information. I mean, that's unheard of, that they were able to collect signals intelligence imagery. Now, some of the imagery also you can't get from space. At that altitude, it's much more refined, and for targeting purposes. Now, if the PLA, which it wants to target those strategic sites, the calibration of that target is much better at the altitude that they were flying at, as opposed to the satellites that are flying high. Now, obviously, like you mentioned, there are spies here on the ground, but they can't fly over those bases because it's a restricted zone. And if they fly with let's say, a rented aircraft, they would be forced down and they would be found out. The balloon had lots of effect, and it goes back to also the psychological effect, the media effect, and the legal effect of the three warfares that are associated with unrestricted warfare.
Well, when you frame it like that, it just seems incredulous to me that the U.S. would allow the spy balloon to fly across basically the entire continental United States and try to cover it up just so Blinken can get a meeting with Xi Jinping or a trip in China. That seemed insane to me.
Well, that's why the American people were upset. I mean, and it was visible. The spies on the ground are less visible. What they're doing in terms of stealing intellectual property and other technology is less visible, but that balloon is very visible. The only thing missing is a red balloon with a CCP flag on it or something,
That would have made it clearer.
We should give them that advice for next time.
Please make it clear to us that you're flying a reconnaissance balloon over our country and identify it so that we know it's you, not somebody else. Yeah. And at first, they denied it was theirs, and then they said it was a weather balloon, and we even used their propaganda. Oh yes, it probably is a weather balloon. But as some people got photos of it, they said, no, this is not a weather balloon. It's huge. It's got solar panels.
I don't know. When the government tells me it's a weather balloon,
I mean, also, every time I hear it was a weather balloon, I'm like, I feel like that just signifies a cover up, right?
And weather balloons don't go thousands of miles, by the way. They just go up maybe a few hundred miles, and then they come down and they collect the data that was on those balloons. This balloon also had satellite communication, uplinks and all kinds of antennas and cameras and stuff like that. So,
since you are an expert in irregular warfare, how does this tie into the Communist Party's broader unrestricted warfare? And you mentioned psychological warfare being an aspect of this. What is this? How does this fit into the bigger picture?
So if you think about it, what they're signaling is the inability for the U.S. government to protect the American population from the CCP. I mean, that's the big picture. Imagine if this balloon had weapons on it and they were to kick out either bombs or if they had cruise missiles on it. That's the psychological aspect. Is at first no one knew what was on it, but it was big enough to carry weapons. And so it could have been used as a means to deliver those weapons. So there's a fear factor affecting the fact that we're vulnerable, makes us feel vulnerable. And so the people of the United States feel like their government isn't doing their job. And so that's the effect that the Communist Party wants to have, is to show that the impotence of the U.S. government. The legal aspect is that they were able to violate our airspace. And we didn't do anything about it until the very end. And one of the key things that my co-author wrote in the articles we had on this topic is he pointed out that the U.S. government kept on emphasizing the fact that we didn't want to shoot it down because of safety. They never talked about the fact that it was a reconnaissance system. It was always about, we see this balloon and we don't want to shoot it down because of safety. And then later on, we shoot it down over land. So what happened to the safety factor in the first story? It's a lie. They just didn't want to call it a reconnaissance balloon until later on. So even the U.S. government was having problems with how it would describe this balloon, which was clearly a reconnaissance balloon. So there was a legal aspect of it, in the sense that China can imagine if instead of a balloon, it was a bomber flying over the United States. That's clearly psychologically a strong message to the American people that you're all vulnerable. You can't stop us. We are more powerful than you are. You can't fly over our country, but we can fly over your country.
Now I'm thinking about the recent incidents in the South China Sea and the Taiwan Strait, where a Chinese jet made dangerous maneuvers in front of a U.S. Air Force craft. Same thing with the U.S. Navy ship in the Taiwan Strait, I believe that was, where another Chinese ship came close by. It seems just like open contempt at this point.
Yeah, and some people are saying that, oh, it's just some, in the case of the aircraft, it's just some pilot who's a little aggressive and he's doing these things. Look, I served over 20 years in the U.S. Air Force. No one does any of those kind of activities without permission from above, okay? And I'm talking way above the military. There's no way that any military officer would tell a fighter pilot to do those maneuvers without political support. If there was something that the CCP didn't want, it would never happen. In the worst case scenario, when the pilot came down, he'd be shot. Okay, but this is continuing. It's all part of their gray zone thing, where they disregard the law. Going back to legal warfare or lawfare, they want to push the limits And one of the key points of unrestricted warfare, one of the famous quotes in the book is, in unrestricted warfare, there are no rules. So they disregard all rules as much as they can. And, so far they've kept it under, within the sort of below the war level. But if you remember in 2001, we had a stupid Navy pilot from the PLA Navy fly too close to our EP3, and his wing hit the Navy wing. He crashed, he died, and our aircrew had to do an emergency landing on Hainan Island, which is controlled by the PRC, and our guys had to stay in government confinement for over a week. Okay, so that was very close to war. I mean, if that fighter pilot had, instead of clipping our wing, clipped the wing off, those guys would have been dead. The whole crew would have been dead. And so they're playing with fire. But what they're doing is that they can say, we don't follow the rules. We don't have to follow the rules. You guys can follow the rules, but we don't. And then just one other thing, the fact that the military side of the PLA is refusing to answer calls on the hotline between the Pentagon and Beijing makes it even worse, because something like this happens, if they don't answer the call, there's no telling how the escalation will go.